In this exercise, we are going to consider it as a market where there are 100 individual consumers which each have an inverse demand curve which has been given. In addition to that, there has been given a total, also called a market inverse supply. Now please note that term, a total supply or a market supply or inverse supply for that matter, just means that we're looking at the supply from all firms or all producers. And the difference then is that when we look at the inverse demand that we've been given is not the total, the market demand, that's the demand or the inverse demand coming from each individual consumer. Now what that means is that when then in question 1 we're going to find the equilibrium price and quantity, which I hope you know that we find by finding the intersection of the total, the market supply and demand. What we first need to do is we first need to find market / total demand. So let's do that. And then let's write that we do it. First, we find total / market demand. And please note that if there is no confusion, you can leave out the total, the market, and just call it demand. It's just when you want to avoid confusion with individual demand that you call it total or market demand. And how do we do that? And the answer is we do that by beginning to look at individual inverse demand. And please note when we use a lowercase q here, it's in order to stress the fact that the quantity is the individually demanded quantity. So we start with the inverse demand, since that's what's given. And then what we want to do in this equation is we want to isolate the individually demanded quantity. We want to isolate lowercase q. And if we do that by moving this term 100q to the other side of the equality sign, we get 100q equaling 100 minus p. And remember, now that I'm going to divide by 100, that there is an invisible 1 here. And then we get the individually demanded quantity by dividing both of these numbers by 100, over here giving us 1, and over here giving us 0.01 p. if you want to use decimal numbers. And what we've got here, in other words, is what we would call individual demand. Not inverse demand because we don't have price isolated, but demand because we have the quantity isolated. And that is what you want, because you want to find the number of units that each individual would like to buy. Because based on that, we can now find the total quantity demanded. So the first step when you've been given individual demand and want to find total market demand is, if it has not already been done in the demand curve you've been given, because you've got inverse demand, the first thing you want to do is you want to isolate in inverse demand the individually demanded quantity. Then what you want to do is you want to say that hence the total quantity demanded is, and let's call it uppercase Q because it's the total. And then the whole point is that that must be 100 times the individually demanded quantity, since there are 100 individual consumers each wanting to buy this many units, and then the total quantity demanded must be 100 times that. And then what you do is you insert the expression you found up here for the individually demanded quantity. In other words, we now get here 100 times, and then remember a parenthesis because I'm replacing lowercase q by the expression up here, which consists of two terms. There is a minus here, so now we should have a parenthesis around 1 minus 0.1 p. And then we can clean up a bit here. Let's write q again. And if we multiply 100 into the parenthesis, we get 100. And then we get 100 times 0.01, which is 1, and you don't have to write that, so we just get P. And what we have basically got now is the relationship between the total quantity demanded and price. In other words, we have got market demand, or if you prefer, total demand. We can call it uppercase D for total demand. Then what you might want to do also is you might want to isolate back the price. In other words, you might want to get inverse demand. The reason why you might want to do that is that the next thing we're going to do is we're going to find the equilibrium in the market. And the equilibrium in the market is found, I will write it when I do it, it's found as the intersection of the supply and the demand curves. And in that case, you will want the two expressions where you've got the same variable on the left-hand side. And if you look in the text of the exercises, you will see that in the supply curve, we've got P on the left-hand side. We've got inverse supply. But before we do that, let's just briefly go over the story once more. If you've been given individual demand curves or individual inverse demand curves, and if you want to find total demand, then what you do is you take the individual inverse demand curve, isolate the quantity, and then the total quantity demanded is just the number of consumers times the individually demanded quantity. And then you substitute for that the expression you found in the first step, and then you simply clean it up. You clean up the expression and you isolate either Q giving you demand or P giving you inverse demand, whichever happens to be the smarter thing in relation to what you're going to use it for. But we're now going to use it for calculating the equilibrium in the market. And let's start doing that by writing what we're going to do. We're going to use the fact that equilibrium is found where demand and supply intersect, where the demand and the supply curves intersect. And remember, it's given in the text. You don't have to state it. I just need you to be able to see it so you know what I'm going to do now. Supply or inverse supply is given as P equaling 10 plus 2Q. And that's exactly why I wanted inverse demand down here, because now you find the intersection of demand and supply here. You find it, since you've got the same variable on the left-hand side, by equating the right-hand sides. So in other words, let's have a colon here. We now take this expression 100 minus Q and equate that to the expression up here, 10 plus 2Q. And what you get is, from a mathematical point of view, one equation in one unknown, namely Q, and then you simply solve it. Let's do it once slowly. The first thing we do is the first thing we do is we move terms. Remember, terms are something with minus or plus in between. We move terms from one side of the equality to the other. And when doing that, what we want is only numbers on one side and only terms involving the unknown on the other side. To be specific, what we could now do is we could take this 10, and remember there is an invisible plus in front, move to the other side here, then we have 100 minus 10. At the same time, we could take this minus Q and move to the right side of the equality sign, remembering to make it a plus. And then I haven't written the plus up here, but I can do it if you prefer. So that's step number one. Now I've got only numbers on one side and only terms involving the unknown on the other. Then we clean up. That's the second step. And in doing that, remember there is an invisible 1 there. So now what we get here is 70 equaling 3Q, because it says 2Q plus 1Q. And then in the final step, you simply write the unknown first, and then you find it as the number which was all by itself, divided by the number in front of the unknown in the previous step. That means, whoops, sorry, I can't calculate here. It's 90. Then you take the 90 and divide them by the number in front of Q, in other words 3, giving you 30. And then we have found the total quantity in equilibrium, the total quantity demanded and supplied. Then we need, and then we finished, we need to find the price, and you can now find the price by simply inserting the quantity found into either the supply curve. If you do that, let's do it before I write it, you get 10 plus 2 times the quantity is 30, so you get 10 times plus 2 times 30, that's 70. Alternatively, you insert into demand, giving you inverse demand, you get 100 minus the quantity, 100 minus 30, that's 70. You will get the same regardless of whether you insert into inverse supply or inverse demand, so there really isn't any point in doing both. You can just write, if you want to, that you could do both. So you can write here, and then price is found from demand, P equaling 100 minus 30, that's 70. And then you can write, if you want to, in a parenthesis, or from supply. But you don't have to do both. You don't have to do both. I just do it here once so that you will see that we actually do get the same. And then we haven't in the question, at least I think, no, we haven't been asked to do a sketch, but if we had, then, but we haven't, so please, you shouldn't do it. Don't do anything you haven't been asked to do. It's a waste of time. It will earn you 0 points. But had we been asked to make a sketch, then it's just a matter of sketching the demand and the supply curves here. And then apparently, based on our calculations here, they intersect at a quantity equal to 30 and a price equal to 70. And then the only obstacle in this question is that we hadn't been given total market demand directly. We had been given instead individual demand, individual inverse demand, and then based on that we derived ourselves an expression for total demand. But of course, had we been given total demand directly, it was just a matter of calculating the intersection as we've done over here. And hereby we conclude question 1.